to be back.
Twisted Metal for the PlayStation 3 may be the worst game that I love. It's rough, it's rowdy, it's lacking in content that many would have come to expect from this beloved car combat franchise. It received heaps of criticism and vitriol from critics and fans alike, but I love it anyway. It was the first Twisted Metal game to be developed from the ground up by the studio Eat Sleep Play, a studio comprised of many of the original members from Singletrack and Incog Inc., who were responsible for the first two games in the series along with Twisted Metal Black and Head On, including David Jaffe and Scott Campbell, the co-creator duo, whose efforts have historically led to the best the franchise has ever had to offer.
And it's like, please get the out of my kitchen. I'm trying to cook this stew.
This was not the first time Eat Sleep Play was able to get their hands on something Twisted Metal related, as they were tasked with working on the PlayStation 2 port of Twisted Metal Head On, known as the Extra Twisted Edition, where they added a number of bonus features such as the playable demo of the cancelled sequel to Twisted Metal Black called Harbor City, as well as the cut full motion video endings from Twisted Metal 1.
Sounds good to me, baby!
There's even a documentary titled The Dark Past, which is a 30-minute retrospective look at the series where the team describes their experience of having worked on Twisted Metal throughout the years. It was during that documentary that a few coded messages can be seen throughout that ultimately read, quote, Twisted Metal is coming to PS3. That was all the way back in 2008. The game that eventually made its way to the PlayStation 3 didn't release until 2012. So what happened in the intervening 4 years? Most accounts of that development period describe plenty of turmoil and confusion at several points. Before full production even began, there were many ideas for how they should approach the next generation of Twisted Metal. They played around with it taking place in the post-apocalypse, with the imaginative working title of Twisted Metal Apocalypse. Not much work was done on that front, and all that came out to the public is some concept art depicting Sweet Tooth wearing a gas mask. The post-apocalypse was scrapped as the team thought a large part of the fun of Twisted Metal came from destroying the environment yourself during battle, and having a setting that is already destroyed would rob the player of that fun. It's also been said that Scott Campbell just couldn't get down with that vibe.
What have you done with our baby?
Hello, it's me again, the Twisted Metal 2012 announcer, here to tell you that you clicked on this video. Subscribe to Drew Desidue, or I will replace everything you own with the version your mom says you have at home. Have fun playing Medal of Duty. Superior Battle Boys on your Z-Cube 720.
Another idea that was considered was a Midnight Club or Fast and Furious style entry that would feature an urban setting with gangs running the streets. But it too was cancelled as the team just couldn't get behind the setting and the ideas just never came. Eventually the team ended up moving forward with what would be a $20 to $30 online multiplayer only release that would be available as a digital download through the PlayStation Network. The focus would be gameplay and story would be non-existent, but that was later changed to a fully featured retail product after Sony determined after market research and analysis that it would sell better than a game of smaller scope if they added a single-player component and sold it for $60. Its setting would be similar to that of the rest of the games, a world that resembles our own, just waiting to be demolished. They decided that there's no need to get cute with car combat. It's best if they just execute what Twisted Metal has always been, both in setting and gameplay. Can they strike that Twisted Metal lightning once again on the PlayStation 3 and drag this beloved IP from the depths of obscurity and bring back the glory days of PlayStation 1? Let's find out if they did. Let's find out if Twisted Metal 2012 is underrated and overhated. For better or worse, this game completely changed the single-player formula we've all come to love and expect from the series. Rather than a traditional tournament mode where each car has a specific driver with their own backstory, motives, and personality, this game would feature just 4 drivers that can be assigned to any vehicle, regardless of how much sense it makes. Sweet Tooth can strap himself into the 2-wheeled contraption of Axel, Dollface can plop her rear down on the well-worn saddle of Reaper, Preacher can commandeer a demonic ice cream truck, and Grimm can fly an actual fucking helicopter. Each of the 4 drivers is the leader of a faction. Sweet Tooth has the clowns.
Oh hell yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Dollface has the dolls.
How does that feel, bitch?
Grimm has the skulls.
Boom, that's what's up.
And Preacher has the holy men.
You devil.
All of which serve as their respective teams used in the multiplayer mode. In the story mode, the only characters to be given their own campaign to progress through are Sweet Tooth, Grimm, and Dollface, with Preacher being relegated to just a couple of short appearances within the campaigns of the other characters.
My God has come.
The campaigns must be completed in a specific order, starting with Sweet Tooth, followed by Grimm, and finally with Dollface. So that being said, let's start with Sweet Tooth. He's on the hunt for the one that got away, the only person to ever escape his wrath, his daughter Sophie. His story gives us a little backstory into who he was before turning into this complete rage monster. He was a simple man with a simple life, a loving family, a nice home in the suburbs, and a pleasant job delivering ice cream to his adoring neighbors. But underneath it all, he has some dark force calling to him, begging to be let loose and take over his physical form. One day he answered that call and carved a mask that would become his new identity, Sweet Tooth. His first targets were the family of the man formerly known as Marcus. Hijinks ensued and all but his daughter perished by his blade. So his wish is to tie up some loose ends. Every campaign is broken up into 6 events that are unique for each character. Sweet Tooth starts out with a simple deathmatch on Sun Springs, California, the sun-soaked suburb complete with all the staples of American life. A cinema, grocery store, rival high schools with football stadiums bigger than literally anything else, and quiet streets snaking their way across countless neighborhoods. They even have a phallic clock tower in the center of it all. Truly American. I chose Death Warrant for this first outing as a callback to the demo of this game. The demo allowed players to get their first taste of what Twisted Metal on the PS3 could offer. The only vehicle you can pick was Death Warrant, and the only map you can play on was Sun Springs, California. And despite that, I didn't care. I was immediately hooked. I played that demo over and over and over again until they shut it down to gear up for the full release. I found it only fitting to kick this off with a shout out to that demo. Plus, Death Warrant is extremely balanced and beginner friendly. Enough armor to not be punishing, enough speed to not feel lumbering, and a special weapon that is simple to use but does decent damage when fully charged up. The car resembles a modern muscle car, and the throaty roar doesn't let you forget that. Death Warrant is a solid all-rounder, and I can see why they used it for the demo, as the ambassador for this game when we knew next to nothing about how it felt to play before it released. The special is a chain gun with 2 modes of fire, a standard mode that when fully charged has your gunner holding a minigun out of the window and shooting opponents with a constant stream of homing bullets. But if you press triangle to perform the alternate special, you can add a volley of missiles to the carnage. The charge up for the alternate special has 2 stages and must be timed correctly to get the second charge up sequence, which sounds more complicated than it is. It's actually pretty easy to get down, and when you do, the damage is gnarly. For this video, I played on the normal difficulty to try to get the experience that I think most people would have while playing this game, and right away I got acclimated back to the speed and control of this game, which feels fantastic and smooth all the way around. The physics at times can turn this game into a pinball machine, but for the most part, this is the best Twisted Metal has ever felt in terms of the moment-to-moment, satisfying, visceral interaction. It's also clear immediately how intentional the developers were about the weapons and vehicles, with each one having a distinct role and place in combat. They truly tried to make this the deepest experience in the series. The whole game is bursting from the seams with its dedication to that risk-reward philosophy, and easily has the most thoughtfully crafted gameplay the series has ever seen. The presentation of this game is also a standout feature, especially in the way it enhances the experience. Not only are the visuals striking and engaging with detailed textures and models for everything in the design of maps and vehicles. It may not shock you with its high fidelity and ultra realism, but it's vibrant and fun. Returning to this game is the articulating weapons, where every weapon being launched from a car can be seen popping out from a different compartment, and each missile, when let loose, stands out like a neon strand connecting players to their destruction. The weapons also have a unique sound when used, which makes not only for more interesting and exciting gameplay, but adds to the strategy of using audio cues to help you know when to shield or evade incoming attacks. Sun Springs, California was witness to a storm cloud of torrential ass-kicking, the likes of which these typical suburban dwellers have never thought possible. Death Warrant sliced his way through the competition with ease, and my efforts earned me a gold medal for this event. Medals are awarded to players for their times in completing events. There are gold, silver, and bronze medals that can be won. Medals are not required to complete the game, but they do offer rewards in certain cases. The most difficult of which being to unlock Warthog, you need to get gold medals on every event on the hardest difficulty, known as Twisted. I did that, and it was awful. Moving on to our second event, we find ourselves in Black Rock Stadium, a map that takes a lot of inspiration from the second level of Twisted Metal 2, but expanded in every way, and also not complete garbage tier bullshit. This arena is a giant bowl with a crazy amount of moving parts, massive swinging wrecking balls, electric floors, and walls that raise and lower throughout the match, completely changing the layout in an instant. It's easily the most dynamic level we've seen in the series to this point, but I'm still not a big fan. The style is uninteresting to me, it doesn't flow particularly well, and aside from enemies getting smoked by the level hazard sometimes, there just isn't much for me to like about this map. I think it comes down to the variety of different elevations this map has and how hard it is to transition from each one. I know most people love this arena, but I just don't care for it, but even I can't discount the amount of cool ideas they have here. There are little pads that will force random spectators from the stands to be launched into the map, where running them over will provide additional weapons. Not that this game needs more pickups, as they are everywhere. Rarely was there a time when I was looking for weapons and none could be found, which is good because the blistering frenetic pace of this game means you'll be unloading that inventory just as quickly as you acquire it. This game is constant, overwhelming action, and I love it. I chose Outlaw for this level, as they were the next vehicle in the selection screen after Death Warrant. Outlaw is another fantastic all-rounder option that new players can have an easy time learning. Returning as a version from Twisted Metal Black, Outlaw is a police SWAT SUV whose special weapon sees your gunner operate a mounted turret on top of the car that has two firing modes. The first mode has the turret able to shoot in every direction around the vehicle, and pressing the fire button repeatedly will send grenades at your opponents for bonus damage. The damage is solid and can attack from every direction, but when switched to the alternate mode, the turret can only shoot targets in front of you, but has a greater output of destruction, as the grenades are replaced with missiles that can fire much quicker. You can rack up damage quickly with the alternate mode, so you have to make a choice if you want to be able to hit targets around you for less damage, or if you can keep them in front of you, you can take it to the next level. He has a ton of armor and surprisingly good handling to go with it. Outlaw is really a go-to for me in this game as a reliable choice when you don't really know what else to choose. I finished off Black Rock Stadium the same way a bricked up fire hose might go against some notebook paper. Just utter domination. Metro Square is our next stop and provides us the first real wrinkle in the typical deathmatch formula. The objective is still to turn every person who isn't you into unrecognizable piles of scrap, but now you have to do that while staying within a pre-designated area that changes every 45 seconds to a minute or so. Staying outside the cage for too long will result in you taking damage. It's a neat way to change up the gameplay, but it would have been nice to see the map like Metro Square have a chance to be explored more freely. The electric cage match offers somewhat of a tour of the level, but doesn't give you a chance to fully appreciate the different areas before you have to move on to the next location. This arena just oozes fine details with its intricate layout, super dense and a joy to look at. It's one of my favorites in the game and really the whole series. I chose Roadboat this time around, who is exactly what it says on the rusty tin. A massive, clumsy brick that will never win any awards for style. Roadboat is a lumbering disaster, but that doesn't mean they aren't fully equipped to destroy everything in sight. Its main special weapon is a magnetic projectile that can either launch as 3 separate pieces that can bounce off walls, or as one big piece that can home in on enemies. The alternate special allows that magnet to flip over and suck enemies into it, incapacitating them and giving you the choice to either yeet them into the sun or ram them into a wall for huge damage. Roadboat also has crazy armor, so being caught in the thick of battle is not a problem, and if anything is a welcome place to be, as the ram damage is immense. After just a few minutes, I cleaned up Metro Square from the enemy scum that has befallen it. This brings us to the halfway point of Sweet Tooth's story, where he gives us a little backstory on his situation that we already talked about. A normal guy compelled by an ice cream demon to take up horrific acts of violence, blah blah blah. Went to a hospital looking for his daughter, just missed her, got mad, had a Karen freakout, blah blah blah. Moving on to the next event, we have another special mix-up of the regular Twisted Metal link. This time we are tasked with taking out a truck and trailer that poops out enemies. It's called Juggernaut, and it's basically just Darkseid with some extra caboose. The basic premise is the same: destroy every opponent. All of it going down on Watkins Harbor, a seaside industrial park with several pollution-bellowing sites, all ripe for destruction. It's covered in this orange haze that brings this map closer to Twisted Metal Black than just about any other in this game. I loaded in using Reaper the motorcycle. Reaper is by far the weakest in terms of armor, only having a paltry 90 hit points to work with, but it's made up for by having the most powerful special weapon by far, the chainsaw. Throwing the chainsaw at enemies in its normal mode does about 40 damage and has minor homing ability, good for finishing off an enemy who's low on health, but otherwise pretty unremarkable. The real star of the show comes when you perform a wheelie with the special equipped. The chainsaw is dragged on the ground until it catches fire. Throwing it while on fire will have no homing at all, but does enough damage to clench the anus of any opponent unlucky enough to be in its path. It does 150 points of damage, which can one-shot a handful of vehicles and pretty much two-shot everyone else, including the big bad Juggernaut. I whipped an entire hardware store's worth of chainsaws at these enemies, each one detonating like an Oppenheimer special on these helpless opponents. Reaper is as glass as cannons could be. which you would think means caution is your ally, but I found that aggression is key. Turns out enemies can't enemy if they're just burning wreckage on the side of the road with a chainsaw lodged into their asshole. So, with those chainsaws littering the streets of this once quiet sanctuary of pollution and chemical waste, we can move right along to the most controversial part of this game, the races. There are 3 in total, 1 for each campaign. The first takes place on the Diablo Pass level, which is mostly a linear winding path anyways. It suits being a race better than most maps. Just follow the road and stay under the checkpoints, and you'll be fine. To keep it simple, I used the fastest car in the game, Crimson Fury, who will utterly dominate every other vehicle in a straight line. Down, back, and done. It is possible to do this or any of the other races in a slower vehicle, but that would mean a greater challenge, and spending more time on these races is scientifically proven to be the quickest way to go f*** yourself. So now that takes us to the first boss battle against the Brothers Grimm, a pair of giant monster trucks on a unique version of the Sun Springs, California map, where the sky is red and the buildings are fully destructible. You are forced to use roadkill for this event, most likely so the later phases of the battle function properly, as once you destroy the first monster truck, the remaining one will drape itself in armor that can only be removed by having your gunner climb into its belly and plant some boom packs, which requires you to stay underneath the monster truck for a few seconds. I'm guessing that cars that are too big would not be able to do this section, so we're stuck with this thing, which has a special that is almost identical to Death Warrant, where you charge up a chain gun and missile combo. Roadkill has an extra level of charge up and can do much more damage than Death Warrant. One of the monster trucks is named Hammerhead, which is a reference to a character that appeared in other Twisted Metal games. After my gunner shoved some C4 into the monster truck's insides, he asked for me to come pick him up, which Sweet Tooth decided wouldn't be as fun as just watching him explode. I'm not sure why the gunner couldn't just drop out of the monster truck's hole. He just sat there until I blew up the armor, which I guess means for the rest of this battle there's just this random clown body stuck somewhere inside the monster truck. Don't think about that too long, because we already finished the boss battle, which rewards us with the ending movie for Sweet Tooth, where he is sent to where his daughter's been hiding all these years, which turned out to be a coffin buried deep below the earth because she took her own life years prior, after she decided that she couldn't live with the trauma of what she went through or the fear that Sweet Tooth would come back. Easily one of the darkest stories in the series. Sweet Tooth is trapped in the coffin with the skeleton, where he is presumed to die. The camera pans up from the miles of dirt and rock above where Sweet Tooth is buried. Then we see Grimm riding by on his motorcycle, where his story begins. Grimm here is not the literal Grim Reaper as he has been in other Twisted Metal games. He's just a guy whose life went off the rails after he lost his father, who died performing a motorcycle stunt at one of his shows, while Grimm was just a child. Grimm hopes to win Twisted Metal and use his wish to go back in time to save his father. Let's see where this goes. The first event of Grimm's campaign is another Juggernaut battle, but this time there's 2 of them and it's on a map we haven't seen yet, Diesel City. This map is also very Twisted Metal Black feeling, with its dilapidated urban setting of crumbling concrete and the sense that there is a creeping darkness taking over the city. I chose Kamikaze for this. They're like a Diet Crimson Fury, where they are extremely fast and utilize a flamethrower special, but they have slightly more armor and are a little easier to control. Their secondary special is a charge-up EMP blast that sends a wave of electricity around the car that can freeze anyone caught in the radius, which I can see being pretty useful in multiplayer, but here has no real purpose. Using Kamikaze's great speed, I pursued the first Juggernaut, held the flamethrower on them, and force-fed them my entire inventory of missiles until they erupted in flames on the highway. I restocked on health and weapons before taking on the second Juggernaut. Kamikaze's best attribute is its maneuverability and speed, able to close in on targets with ease and evade a dangerous situation when needed. The flamethrower special was plenty powerful while melting the rest of the enemies. The second event is a close quarters brawl on a variation of Sun Springs, California called Grindhouse, which only features the movie theater section of the level. I went in with Meat Wagon for no particular reason, they just seemed like a fun way to take on 8 opponents up close. It's worth mentioning at some point that this game does not have a live system like other Twisted Metal games, where you are given a set number of lives to use per level or playthrough, but instead you can choose 3 vehicles before each match that can be swapped between mid-battle at the garage. Not every level allows for the use of the garage, but most do. If you are destroyed using any vehicle, you just restart, so the vehicles in the garage are more or less your lives. There's also a health truck that trolls around the map and will regenerate all of your health when used. Meatwagon handled the Grindhouse well with its surprisingly high armor and decent speed. It's a great all-round vehicle. It's this old-style ambulance whose special weapon sees you launching a distressed man on a gurney. It does moderate damage and solid homing. It's more of a spectacle. The alternate special gives the player direct control over that gurney, where getting a direct hit will do a respectable 90 damage, but leaves your car completely defenseless for the duration of the special, and is way harder than it needs to be to actually land. Meatwagon is most likely a reference to the vehicle that appeared in Rogue Trip Vacation 2012 called Ozone. There was also a vehicle named Meatwagon in Rogue Trip that featured a giant slamming hot dog, so really it's the design of Ozone with the name of Meatwagon. I found a nice wombo combo with the gurney and the shotgun, where the gurney special would pop enemies into the air as a sort of stun, and before they could regain control, I would spin around and deliver a knockout point-blank blow with the shotgun. That moves us along to the next event, which is another electric cage match, but this time on a level we haven't seen yet, Thrills and Spills Adventure Park. One of the most visually interesting and intricately detailed maps in the entire game. It's a shame that the story mode only brings us here this one time, especially since that one appearance is this electric cage match that doesn't let you explore the map freely. Entire sections of this battleground go completely untouched, like the fantasy medieval castle on one side of the map. The spooky haunted house does get some attention, but only if you take too long and the cage eventually gets there. For this go round, I went with Vermin because of their mechanical similarity to Meatwagon, as their special weapon when used in its standard configuration will home in and do enough damage to not be useless, but would switch to the alternate mode. You can pilot the rat rocket yourself like a Call of Duty Predator missile, where a direct hit will do a crazy 100 points of damage. It still leaves you pretty helpless when flying the rat rocket, but it once again shows off that risk-reward mentality this game is built on. With a reeking of Mega Gun havoc, I shredded the competition, diving headfirst into the fray with fury and hellfire. These enemies are rats, and I am their worst nightmare. Grimm lacks a middle cutscene, and instead ceds the floor to Preacher to have his moment in the spotlight, so that he can shout at Calypso like a maniac cackling at the night sky. We also get to see some cool Easter eggs in Calypso's trophy case as it pans across his office towards his desk. How many can you name? Now we head back to Watkins Harbor for another brand new event. This time we're asked to eliminate any 8 opponents. The entire time there's the maximum number of enemies on the map. It's a small wrinkle to the typical deathmatch affair, but I think it does a fantastic job of keeping the battle engaging, even as you get deeper into the fight. In a normal Twisted Metal event, it gets easier as you cut down the field of opponents, but here you are always surrounded by danger. A veritable hurricane of insanity hoping to rip asunder your best efforts to weather their storm. It can be challenging but satisfying and intense when it all comes together. I use Shadow for this as they complete the group of vehicles whose specials are very similar in my opinion. Meatwagon, Vermin, and Shadow are all effectively the same to me. They have similar speed, armor, and special weapon power, with slight variations to each. Shadow is my favorite of those 3 though. Their special sees a man trapped inside a coffin being hurled across the ground, spinning and bouncing off of walls. It can do solid output if it makes direct contact with an enemy, or can be manually detonated. The alternate special sees Shadow lob that same coffin in an arc that can be called down at any time and be used as a remote explosive. That has massive power, doing up to 130 points if it's fully cooked and an enemy runs into it. That, added to Shadow's balanced armor and speed, makes for a vehicle that allows for skilled players to utterly dominate in certain situations. I did a bit of that and cleared the endurance match with ease. Now on to our second race, this time on Sun Springs, California. It's a race to battle that involves being among the first 4 vehicles to cross the finish line, so that you can battle it out with the remaining opponents. It's not vital to be first, but being anywhere that isn't way out in front is just asking to be bounced around and trampled by the roaring stampede. It helps to prepare for the battle at the end by picking up useful weapons along the way, like mega guns and power missiles. Knowing you have to fight the top 3 opponents means it works best to leave the squishy folks alive, so that you don't have to tangle with the likes of Warthog or Darkseid at the end. If the pack goes completely undisturbed, you'll likely end up against some combination of Crimson Fury, Kamikaze, Deathworn, and Roadkill, all of which you might as well call ED because they are as soft as dough when you need them to shine. Allow me to demonstrate. We find ourselves now at the second boss battle, the final step on Grimm's journey to save his father from his wacky stuntman tomfoolery. Her name is Iron Maiden, and it's a giant version of Dollface that flies around the Diablo Pass level as we struggle to bring her down. For many players, this was considered a low point for the game, as it's clunky and awkward to take on. It's a great design and concept, as something of this scale and scope has never even been attempted in the series before. But ambition doesn't always equal quality. If anything, it's the greatest hurdle of something turning out to not be a flaming pile of nonsense. It was an admirable effort from the dev team, but pulling it off is not how I would describe it. The first phase sees the giant mech sporting a shield that can only be deactivated by launching nukes at it. Lucky for us, Calypso left a convenient nuke launcher in the battlefield for us, and all it takes to launch is to blow up the faction leader's limo, and drag their lifeless body to the nuke launcher to be sacrificed. Once gobbled up by the steel jaws of the nuke launcher, the missile was sent out with you in control. Flying it is relatively easy, but Iron Maiden will be shooting at you the whole time, so be sure to shield. She'll likely just fly away from you as you get close because she's faster than your wimp-ass little missile, but eventually you'll catch up and blast the bot. Do that 2 times, and you can finally start to do real damage to Iron Maiden. I use Reaper once again for this fight, as the flaming chainsaw is the greatest tool against the epic chaos unfolding on this deserted winding road. The flaming chainsaw made quick work of the limousines, and even quicker work of Iron Maiden herself, when combined with mega guns. Just total evaporation of her health bar, until she collapsed into the bridge, where it took even less effort to cast her into the void below. Her head rose from the ashes of her failure, and I chainsawed that too. Off, floating head, I have a dad to save. With her destroyed, Grimm visited Calypso, demanding his prize. He wants to go back in time and save his father from trying the stunt that ended him. Calypso grants the wish by sending him back to the past, into the truck his father and him would use to travel between shows. Naturally, this shocked his dad, forcing them to crash their truck, killing him anyways. Grimm and his younger self survived the collision, but the young Grimm found the gun his dad would hide under the seat, and used it to take out the skull-faced stranger who teleported into their truck. And that gives us a nice transition into Dollface's campaign. She's an aspiring model known as Krista Sparks, with dreams of walking the world's most prestigious runways. But so far, getting there has been difficult. Sleeping with photographers and sabotaging other models has not been easy. It gets a whole lot harder when a car accident, likely the same one that ended Grimm's story, left her face in rough shape. Although after some extensive surgery, the only evidence of her horrible accident was a nearly invisible scar on her cheek. But to her, it was this gaping wound that made her into a monster. Desperate, she sends the doctor back to the lobby and takes matters to a different medical expert, one who operates out of a dank alley and doesn't have a license to practice or even working eyesight. He places a mask on her, promising that in a week it'll have fixed everything and she can continue her path to stardom. However, when it came time to remove that mask, the doctor was gone, and no matter what Krista tried, it wouldn't come off. The doctor's name was Dr. Opslak, which is just Calypso backwards. Clever. Dollface enters the tournament to remove the mask and become the world's greatest supermodel. I think the story is fine, but I really enjoyed the version of Dollface that was in Twisted Metal Black much more. Her event brings us back to Black Rock Stadium, where we face another endurance match. Calypso said he made a few changes to the level to add more hazards and dynamic elements, including a room full of spikes, 2 different lava pits, and more moving walls. Otherwise, it's the same arena and still not that fun or interesting to play on, in my opinion. I chose Sweet Tooth to really drive the point home that it's weird that Krista Sparks can get behind the wheel of the iconic ice cream truck. Sweet Tooth is an absolute steamrolling tank in this game. Slow and hard to maneuver, but a hammer in short range. It doesn't go down without dragging everyone else down with it. The main special is a laughing ghost missile that sends the clown head on top of the truck out and can fly through walls to get to its target. It's a true fire and forget weapon, as you don't have to worry about pesky things like walls or the ground eating up your missiles. The secondary special is where things get kinda weird. Sweet Tooth turns into a bipedal mech that can run, fly, and throw his head at enemies. It's useless in normal combat in my opinion, but can be a great way to escape danger when the going gets messy. This event is made infinitely easier by the fact that enemies will often get clobbered by the many level hazards before you even have a chance to blast them yourself. However, Sweet Tooth wanted all the destruction for himself, and I needed no help to destroy the competition. Next, we have the Dual Mean Juggernauts, and the most challenging event in the entire game. You're placed on a small map with barely any health and no garage to swap out your vehicle, so taking damage is something to avoid. The enemies are being pooped out of the metal dumper of the 2 Juggernaut trucks patrolling the level. For this event, I had little other choice than to use Talon, who is best suited for such an endeavor. Talon is the only helicopter to ever be playable in any Twisted Metal game at the time of this writing. They have very weak armor, but that's supposed to be made up for by the ability to utilize an entirely new axis. I recommend using Talon for this event because, unlike every other vehicle, their machine guns will lock onto enemies, including while using mega guns. So all it takes for this event is finding out where the pickups for the mega guns are and unleashing them. With those, Juggernaut becomes quick work. Next up is LA Skyline for another endurance match. This is the rooftops level that every Twisted Metal game is required by law to have. It's a nighttime bout high above the streets of LA that features plenty of distinct areas to explore. It's again such a shame that some of these levels are only shown once during the campaign. I took LA Skyline on with Darkseid, the menacing black semi-truck, which is a character that is horribly equipped for a map where falling off is a very common phenomenon. They make their appearance here with their style from Twisted Metal 1, but using the special from Black. where it gets a sudden burst of turbo with horn blaring to smash into unsuspecting enemies, which is incredibly satisfying and does pretty good damage. The alternate special gives Darkseid some extra ranged capability, with the Trigun turret popping out of the top of the cab that can pump opponents full of lead while you absorb damage with the high amount of armor that Darkseid has. I took out Calypso's blimp and watched it demolish a building that seemed like it was out of bounds, but is actually an accessible area once the blimp gives it the old bop. I torched the remaining bad guys needed to satisfy the win condition of the endurance match, and was rewarded with the middle cutscene of Dollface, which just goes over what we already talked about earlier, about how she got caught up in the whole mask shenanigans. Our last traditional style Twisted Metal event of the game takes place on Metro Square, this time with the maximum number of enemies all after the player all at once, which makes for a great opportunity to show off what Juggernaut is like when under human control. A monstrous health pool and energy meter to match. The weight of this behemoth means every collision with another vehicle is like a meteor crashing into a soda can. Just complete, utter domination. Even when enemies deliver their own blow against the rumbling machine, they'll see themselves taking the hit, as Juggernaut is immune to ram damage. Combined with a large energy meter available to Juggernaut, you can use the advanced shield, which when used will not only protect you from damage, but anyone who tries to attack will see you swallow the weapon for yourself and have a stalker missile fired back at them. Juggernaut is beyond overpowered, and it's a staple of any run on Twisted Difficulty if you're trying to unlock Warthog. The last race is upon us, and for some dumb reason I chose Axel. I guess because I didn't pick them yet and there's only one event left to pick him, so here we are. Axel returns now with Dollface strapped into the contraption. Axel's defining trait, other than its unique design, is their jump height, which is drastically higher than any other vehicle. The primary special sees the wheels closing and having spikes jut out, allowing you to crush enemies, which stuns them and does pretty good damage. The secondary is just a pretty basic shockwave. Axel's speed is fine, nothing special, but enough to handle this awful race on Diesel City. I had a close call near the end where Death Warrant nearly won, but the weird pathing the AI takes to the final checkpoint left him utterly baffled, leaving the truck open for me to drive into it. So with that, we approach the final boss, the most creative one I can think of in Twisted Metal's history, and it's way over the top, total absurdity in every way. It's this enormous shrine to Sweet Tooth, built by his devout followers so they can wander the waste in search of their fallen leader. I used Warthog for this go just to show off that I have him unlocked. Warthog takes the form of their version from Twisted Metal Black, which you might recognize as a station wagon stapled to the top of some tank treads. Its special weapon leans the beast back on its hind legs to crush opponents, much like Axel's special. The downside is, while Warthog is performing its special, it exposes a weak spot that does double damage if struck. Warthog has the most health of any standard vehicle on the roster, with 300 hit points. So having a weak spot is a way to balance that out, I guess. The alternate special also sees Warthog leaning back, but just to charge up a shockwave rather than to crush opponents. Using Warthog turned out to be a huge mistake. The first section is just not suited for a melee-focused armor boy like Warthog, and took quite a few tries to get past, especially since health is tricky to get to when it's stuck between the massive treads of the Carnival of Carnage. But eventually I got past the first section and took the elevator up to the belly of the monster, where I was met with a pinball machine. To get past this area, you need to let the exploding clowns hop on your car so that you can deliver them to the clown head after jumping off a ramp. Rinse and repeat that a few times and it gives way to the obstacle course, which is the worst possible scenario for the slowest vehicle in the game. It's effectively a giant linear metal slide, complete with bombs that'll knock you off course, swinging axes, swinging wrecking balls, buzzsaws, and flame jets. This took even longer than the first phase of the boss fight to get past, but eventually through sheer undeterred willpower and grit teeth, I made it through to the final bit. This is going to sound like a fever dream, but we have to hop aboard Talon after crossing the Fisty threshold, and destroy the flying sweet minions and pick them up with Talon's magnet, and drop them into the giant clown head. You only need to do this 5 times to finish this, but it took closer to 10 because despite my best attempts, they were just as likely to doink off the rim than to actually slide into the hole. This is probably my least favorite thing to do in the entire game, if not the series. It's clear how much passion and creativity went into this whole fight, but the execution and actual playing of it feels bad. It's not Twisted Metal. None of the skills I've acquired over the course of the game are expressed here. It rarely works out the way it should. It feels half-baked, and even if it was fully functional and polished, I don't think it would be fun anyway. But after slamming several sweet bots into the head hole, the enemy was felled, and Dollface is granted an audience with Calypso. Her wish at first was to remove the mask, but she realizes that with the mask off, she'll just be right back where she started, with sleazy photographers and her competition never letting up. So instead, she decides to keep the mask and asks Calypso to put her on a rocket ship to the top, to put her on the world's biggest runway so she can shine. This turned out to be an actual airport runway, where a landing plane crushes her. Kind of a dumb story, I guess, I don't know. But in conclusion, this game is a joy to play. The gameplay is top-notch, it's the deepest and most viscerally satisfying experience the series has to offer. The variety of vehicles and the different ways they can interact with and approach battles is incredible. It's lacking in story and characters, which takes away from its replay value. There's not much of a reason to keep playing the story, other than to try other difficulties and unlock Warthog or other things. The online multiplayer mode would be the perfect place to explore and express your skills using the tools the gameplay gives you. But as I said in the beginning, the servers were nixed a few years ago. But even when the servers were up, to say they were reliable would be a total lie. This game had such great potential to become a dominant competitive multiplayer game that never even got to sniff that status because of its rocky launch and lack of support to fix the problems it had. But despite all of that, the gameplay alone is enough for me to recommend this title to fans of car combat. Twisted Metal 2012 is great. Have a nice day. What a hoot!